Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the ISF Bright Talk channel. My name is Dan Norman. I'm a Senior Solutions Analyst at the ISF, and I'm extremely excited to welcome you to our 7th session of the ISF Cybersecurity Showcase Week. Joining me today is Jorge Ferrer Raventos, Solutions Engineering Specialist at OneTrust, who will be discussing an integrated strategy to reinforce and measure your risk program. But before we start, there are a few housekeeping items to cover off. This presentation will last about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll end with a question and answer session. So if any viewers have any questions, please do type them into the top right-hand corner, into the question box on your screen at any time, and at the end of the session, we'll cover them off. All viewers are automatically muted. So if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, if you can't hear us, then please just leave the webinar and dial back in. And finally, this session, as well as all of the sessions throughout this week, will be recorded and available on demand via our Cyber Awareness Hub, which you can access using the link below. With that said, I'll now hand you over to Jorge, and I will return for the Q&A in about 30 to 40 minutes time. So Jorge, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. So actually, let me manage those slides. So first of all, really good morning, afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining the How to Reinforce Your InfoSec Risk Program in a Not-If When Incident environment. Okay, and actually, first of all, I wanted to introduce myself. Okay, so I'm going to be your host today. Okay, I'm actually one of the solutions engineers for the GRC and Security Assurance Cloud at OneTrust, okay, being part of the OneTrust team for over 3 years, okay? And today's session is really about sharing the perspective that I've learned, as also that I've intaken from OneTrust, okay, of where do we start and where do we go next, okay, when it comes to risk management across our tech stack and our information security program, okay, which we can actually see that it's kind of a hot topic in today's present day. So kind of the speed and scale and sprawl of data have changed the risk landscape, something that I will definitely expand in today's presentation, okay? So we can actually see how the security leadership or the CISO's roles have continued to expand and evolve, okay, as it's convenience to operate at scale. So we can actually say how CISOs, have been demanded to do many more things as the business is growing within digital transformation. Okay, we can actually see how it is evolving. Okay, that digital transformation is bringing from more productivity, as also like even that's bringing from collaboration or even hybrid the capacity to work from home. Okay, like in a sense that maybe we've been affected in the last 2 years. So definitely that demand has come in a sense and has made businesses evolve, but there's also some implications when speaking about risk, okay? So the main point here is that security leaders, CISOs, are actually asked to monitor more that incident and risk base, okay? So we could actually see how, for example, when we speak with small and medium enterprises, those are wearing more hats than ever before. And also, enterprises or more large organizations need to manage and control key stakeholders across different business functions, to satisfy their specific needs and also understand their implications to make sure everything is going kind of in the right direction, okay? So first thing we're going to actually start with, okay, is actually the annual IBM cost of data breach study, okay, that had a massive headline this year with actually an annual cost of data breach reaching to $4.35 million US dollars, okay, which from my perspective is quite alarming, okay? But actually, when we go and we dive deeper to understand the cascading impact in an organization of this aspect, there's actually something which is also quite curious, okay, which is that 60% of businesses that surveyed, okay, to IBM here reported that they increased the prices of their services to offset the cost of those data breaches. Okay, so kind of here we see, like, for example, like organizations now start to even consider doing threat and vulnerability scanning, in the sense to have all of your assets under control, to see that all of the servers have the latest patch. Okay, and because that can actually then, if not, imply a specific cost. Okay, so even the other point here, which is only 39% of employees said that they're very likely to report a security incident. So here is something really important, which is actually how our employees can be one of our most valuable assets, but can also be a vulnerability. So it's actually key here to make sure to understand, first of all, within softwares that you imply in your organizations, that those support role-based access controls. Okay, so you can actually understand who has access to what and to what, but also that you've got a mechanism in your organization to report an incident in the right moment. Okay, and that they know how to report it, because if only 39% of your staff are likely to report that incident, then you've got 61% of those who won't, and that can definitely incur into a specific cost. Okay, so that is really, really important to understand. As also, the continued expansion of this market reinforces that the reality um, is that there's going to be more defensive costs to adversary costs. Okay, so kind of like in this sense, you need to start bringing technology that helps you to also protect and to manage those incidents in the right way. Okay, so kind of the main takeaways for this slide, I would say, are that the impacts of risk realized are cascading throughout business strategy. Okay, and the landscape is more dynamic than ever, both externally and internally, as the nature of the audit, but when branch mentality security teams need to adopt to focus on the most critical areas of their business. Okay, as understand how can you mitigate that with the appropriate controls. So I want to ask here the audience, what are some of the core challenges for organizations like yourselves facing these realities on a regular basis? How do you treat those incidents? Do you have a specific business continuity plan to monitor and to make sure that that incident does not imply, specific costs? So moving to the next slide, okay, I think this is again also a great summary. Those would be challenges that risk and security leadership see. Okay, so we have a dynamic threat landscape where the stakes are incredibly high and rising in many cases. Okay, so first of all, we can see, for example, another study in this case provided by Price Waterhouse, okay, which was asked to name the top consequences of operational complexity. And those respondents basically named three, okay, which one is financial losses, okay, due to successful data breaches or cyber attacks, okay. Definitely, we also see how those kind of like ransomware attacks, or the kind of cyber terrorists are more knowledgeable and more trained, okay, which that has an implication because you also got to have more security mechanisms. The second element that was raised was inability to innovate, okay, as quickly as the market opportunities allow. So kind of can be from implications that everyone, maybe right now there's not the budget that we have 1 year ago, okay, due to the economical situation that we are, as even you might not have that sponsorship that you used to have now. So that's also an implication to have in mind. And the third one is lack of operational resiliency. So the ability to recover from a cyber attack or technology failure. So I don't know if you guys remember this case, but there was actually 1 year ago, there's a famous pipeline in the west coast of in the east coast of United States, which actually got stopped, okay, the whole activity of providing, oil and petrol through that whole East Coast due to a ransomware attack by a Russian terrorist group. So in that sense, that also had huge implications in their activity, and they were not capable to recover, okay, in the best managed, due to maybe not have a business continuity plan in place, okay. Other elements from this slide that I want to mention. So, for example, 75% of executives would be from CS levels, okay, expressed that the organization is too complex, or in that sense, is hard to identify where to start because of the operational layers and matrix department functions that you may have, okay? And is why is security is overwhelmingly on the top to initiate for CEOs and CISOs. And security leaders such as yourselves are directly responsible for maintaining the right protections, So it's maybe also important even having to consideration also those key human resources that we spoke about and how you take those elements, okay? The second point here are certainty of risk ownership. So we see how roughly 60% of organizations move to the cloud, which that also implies more risk, and now nobody really, less organizations do actually do on-premise implementations because they're more expensive in a sense, but also everything is connected and is more accessible, whether if you're working from home in that sense. So that's kind of, although 60% of the businesses were moving to the cloud, you could see in this Pricewaterhouse survey that not all of security controls were necessarily followed. So, for example, let's put a quick example. But actually, when we were actually enforced to work from home due to the pandemic, I'm for sure that maybe a lot of organizations didn't actually review different policies they have into place. Whether to make sure that the different employees are trained to understand when do they, for example, need to log off their computer, or which applications can they use in front of their family relatives, as also how to report an incident and how to even report a risk and complete a risk assessment. As the third point here, which is kind of like CISOs are now going to be demanded more elements, and from this survey, some highlights I would like to read, okay, is that kind of like they are over-invested in some tactical oversights and risk activities, as, for example, security operations, staff management, policy and standard settings, as maybe vendor management, rather than focusing also in other key elements, which is relationship building, okay, which is key to have that sponsorship, and also to kind of like bring that culture of imposing those risk and control implications solutions, okay, that you're going to use in the whole tool, as also strategic planning, how to kind of define the whole plans to reduce all of those elements, okay. So moving to the next piece, okay, which is kind of an action plan to reinforce IT risk and governance, okay. So in speaking kind of with our internal team here at OneTrust, okay, as well as organizations, as prospects, we actually saw some specific IT governance challenges, okay, which are three mainly, and we can see in this specific slide, okay. The first one is establishing a solid foundation of strong IT and data asset management, okay, because this can be a quite complex piece to do, okay. Then scaling the program to engage with the business, okay. So how are you translating controls and security best practices across people, processes, and technology, okay. Whether you're ramping up with, let's say, an integrated solution or working to simplify very complex environments. Because actually think it this way. When you sometimes happens, you're sadly not competing against other departments, but maybe in your department you use another tool that other specific departments want, and it's key to have that integration to connect that whole flow of information, whether it's risk management, whether it's all of the analysis of third line of defense against other elements. Okay, so again, also with making it easy, because when I've treated and worked with different organizations, I can actually see that context is everything. Okay, and why is context everything? Because when you actually explain a risk to maybe the C's levels or another stakeholder, they might not understand what are the implications as you do. So that's why it's key. And I really like how kind of the GDPR mentions this is make things easy to understand, like if you were speaking to a children. Okay, and also um, align those elements to objectives. Okay, so understand what is the implication of controlling that risk. Okay, because sometimes if you actually read reverse, for example, a control, you can actually see what is the risk of not applying that control. As also when you're summarizing that to a specific stakeholder, um, link it to their processes so they can actually understand well what is the implication. Okay, and the third piece here would be optimizing and adapting. Okay, so um, getting the perspective of what is this actual experience is like. Okay, so what can be the biggest challenge? Okay, and kind of like what I mentioned. Okay, of translated it so people can understand what is the whole objective of managing that risk. So let's now look into those in detail. Okay, so establishing a foundation. Okay, in many companies, the broader ecosystem for IT and data asset management have not made sure to keep up with the security approaches. Okay, and the first question I'm going to ask you is how to evaluate your current IT ecosystem and centralize key data points to enhance visibility to risk across critical areas of the business. And that's why it's key to have different tools that assist in this element and understand the whole process as the stakeholders involved and also different registers. Okay, so the first thing would be simplify and rationalize. Okay, so kind of like understand, for example, what assets, technology, or data, if they were lost, what implications would they have? Okay, for example, with the element we mentioned about the pipeline in the states. Okay, what is the if we had a specific issue or a ransomware attack, how would it be affected, or how would it affect to lose the specific service with all of that information that we may have? Then understand the business. What are your critical assets? Okay, so that's kind of again important to have that kind of register within your inventories as also linked with the processes. Okay, so it's actually going beyond that having a record of processing activities. Okay, it's more about linking the dots and understanding, for example, also even linking those different assets or different applications with different vendors. Okay, in case you've got a different um, issue, you can also communicate with the vendor really quickly. Okay, as leveraging interview surveys. Okay, to understand the whole context. Okay, when you are transmitting all of those elements and defining the scope, and categorize and align value. Okay, so speaking business function and revenue terms that leadership really truly understand. What I've already mentioned, of also when you're actually also getting sponsorship, actually align that with different useful metrics. Okay, which are relevant to that stakeholder you're speaking, or diving deeper into practically. So actually use that foundation to information security analysis across other domains. So linking that with other elements, okay, as like understand on where is that whole direction going. So IT and data asset management, okay. Kind of like, well, here we spoke about Log4j, okay, which was kind of a hot topic during that last couple of years, okay, but it actually may seem like a long time ago, but it's something that many organizations are still recovering from and evaluating against. Okay, so that's, you can actually see the implications of something that we might think, okay, this is something which happened last couple of years ago, but actually no, some businesses are still recovering. So how also important is to learn from those mistakes. And specifically, even, like when I work with really mature organizations, what I see is many of those organizations, apart of having all of those registers, like to have a risk library. Okay. And I think that is key because you guys have a lot of know-how. You guys learn a lot from your day-to-day activities. So why not also comply a register of a library of risks that can be used as a starting point. When someone in your organization then is then proposing a risk, they can actually understand, okay, what is the inherent level, how will you treat that specific risk, okay, as also a description, and which control should you apply to reduce that risk, okay. But linking again with IT and data asset management, throughout this exercise, okay, you will identify your own asset inventory, okay, and key parts of the whole process, as also link those with vulnerabilities, okay. If you of course have vulnerability scanning tools, but of course organizations who don't do that exercise, okay, then they will actually can be affected because they don't understand where is all of that information, and actually you can see the whole flow here, which is actually identify your key assets, link those, by different clusters, maybe following the principle of ISO 27001 2013, assess those, okay, whether it's with risk assessments and other processes to identify which are the gaps and where do you need to implement specific controls, treat those in the right manner, and also monitor them, okay. So use maybe tools that have robotic process automation embedded, where you can actually say assets that are hosted in a specific location or that treat specific personal data or that are sensitive in that sense, then they need to be reassessed or monitored in a different way. So kind of like the questions here for this specific slide, is how confident are you with your asset inventory? Like actually I've worked once with an organization that, for example, had over 60,000 assets in a register, and we knew that that data was not clean at all. So that was not really useful. But actually, what we did was an exercise of sending internal questionnaires to the asset owners and relevant stakeholders to understand which assets maybe were duplicate, which ones should actually that organization was not working with, and also understand which one were key and you had to prioritize, okay? As how efficient are you in assessing, like with the different assets, what processes do you use to also update in a recurrent basis, as also even, linking with threat vulnerability scanning tools that provide you that CSV score that can be really important, So moving to the next element, okay, scale the program. So how can businesses construct an outside-in view of the puzzle and identify the critical missing pieces, okay? So consider the fact that the business is always gonna change, okay, from a competitor's perspective, and you're gonna need to keep adding different technology, okay? So how can you keep up to date? Of course, many organizations apply with different projects, like to embed privacy by design, okay? But how can you evaluate which is the best tool? As how can you train your most valuable asset, which at the end is people, which can also be your biggest vulnerability, into adapt to those and use it in the efficient way, okay? So here it's also key to understand what does the business need, okay, what is your budget, and how can you even, use those elements. So here again, it's important to understand, to put a context, have a scope which is relevant to everyone, okay, and prioritize those elements. So enhancing trust throughout risk ownership, okay. So kind of here we're speaking about maturity, trust, and collaboration, okay. And what this grid represents is the fact that when you're operating in a low trust environment, this is where security is owning everything, okay. it can be often very manual, very reactive, and very resource draining, to the point where you're not truly enabled to build an effective roadmap for scalability. Okay, you need to have the foundation that enables your people to make those decisions immediately in any of those lines. Okay, and once you're really engaged, the business to identify, like, and categorize those assets, as translate those controls into their everyday processes, we can look and how do we scale certain security activities so that as security leaders are better enabled to strategic business partners. Okay, so here is key to have risk assessments, okay, that are effective. Okay, so actually, again, linking with the risk library, okay, that can be really useful if you've got a solution that when someone is proposing a risk, they have a starting point. Okay, so imagine I'm reporting a risk, I could actually select from that risk library as a starting point, because maybe that's not the risk I want to report, but that is really accurate to the direction I want to go. So having risk assessments that are up to date, okay, monitoring also control implementations, because when you're treating those risks, you need to implement the corresponding controls, but you also got to make sure you're gathering the latest feedback, sorry, the latest evidence, as the right evidence as core piece to prove that that control is working well. Also allow exceptions, because it's great to report risks, but if you've got, for example, a risk register with 1,000 risks, then the external auditor um, might say, hey, this is a mess. Okay, great, you're reporting everything as risks, but how are you treating those? So kind of also have an exception mechanism to treat maybe low risks as also really high risks in a different manner. Okay, and verify that everything, because kind of in the ideal world, um, everything would be first line friendly. Everything would be, like, we could trust, kind of like the first line of defense or someone completing that risk assessment. But again, like, when you start translating something to someone or feeling something and you forget about the context, you miss all of the work you've done. So here is key, to make things straightforward, easy, aligned to your scope, and again, like, um, assist your colleagues to kind of understand the implication of that risk, maybe aligning it with an objective, but also have a common language for everyone. Okay. So moving to the next slide, which is scale the program with people in mind. Okay. And I've already spoken and mentioned this a lot. Okay. But it's, remember, people that are your most valuable asset and can be your biggest vulnerability. Okay. So important here that you actually engage. Okay. So identify leadership to inform decisions, define timelines, and be uh, change champions for long-term success. Okay. Because even, like, we see in a day-to-day basis, but when you need to, when someone proposes change, okay, it is key to um, understand the implications, but also keep up to date. The second piece would be evaluate. So learning opportunity to take a best of breed approach to adopt solutions that support business objectives. Okay, aligning everything to those objectives, and then execute. Okay, so again, leverage those relationships and technology that are gonna help you define those best practices and also, make things effective. So think about how can you create change champions. As change happens normally from top to down, cannot happen from bottom to up. Okay. And optimize and adapt. Okay, as we transition through maturity, trust, and collaboration, we've talked about how essential it is to have a solid IT and data asset management. Okay, so kind of like priority to build inventories, to protect those. Okay, and it's key here to have accurate KPIs and meaningful metrics, okay, that align all of the business context. Because, for example, let's say you say we've got to the board, okay, you're saying we've got a specific risk because we've got an unpatched server, and you go with a heat map to the meeting with the board, and they're like, okay, but I don't understand the implication. Well, if you actually say we've got this risk, it can affect our day-to-day activity for our customer success team, which can then result in a loss of 10% of our customers in the organization, and also affect these strategic deals that we've got with those prospects. We need to make something as soon as possible, as I suggest, applying those relevant controls. So here you're actually aligning everything into one perspective, and it's easy to track that, and even quantifying, specific SLAs. So when you connect with your network, determine which SLAs are relevant for everyone, as also for your organization, because each organization should have different SLAs when responding to risk. Okay. And kind of like this is the whole journey, okay, which is aligned to objectives, okay, whether it's only regarding with risks. Identify the scope, because the scope is going to be different for every organization, but it's key to define that at the beginning, okay. Maybe you actually also want to link that with a specific standard and framework, okay. Learn from different scenarios. What is the threat of controlling those risks, and what is the opportunity that can bring us? Okay, maybe in that sense, can make our business more valuable in the next couple of years. Okay, learn from your experience in that sense. Then remove guesswork. Okay, so don't guess. Okay, have different processes defined as also a decision tree analysis, and know your audience. Okay, which are the key players here. Translate for the business, something I've said during the whole presentation. Okay, which is key to make it easy to understand for everyone. And trust but verify, okay, which kind of is like be ready to go back, okay, and refine your processes. So integration for proactive cyber risk management, okay. So from an IT governance perspective, to scale efficiencies and keep up with evolving cyber and risk landscape, you need that foundation, okay. So you need to actually govern the program, so measure the effectiveness of your policies, maybe aligning those with specific regulations, standard or frameworks, okay. Then manage and assess risk, okay, in a periodic basis, whether it's at the asset level, at your different business lines or projects in your organization, whether it's for your third, fourth, or fifth parties, or whether it's at the entities, okay, subsidiaries or different departments. And finally, protect the business, okay, inform program improvements to mitigate that impact, okay, which is, as you can see, by evaluating control effectiveness and also identify those issues and gaps. And it is kind of quite quick, okay, prior to the audience questions, kind of the summary I would give here, okay, you will find a lot of tools which are great in the GRC world. What is key, I would say, when I work with organizations, is to understand the whole flow, okay, and understand which stakeholders are in place, have as many different ways to report a risk, to report an incident, and connect everything in one. Because, for example, when I've dealt with organizations, you might have the development team that use Jira or a specific ticketing team, and they don't want to move from that. So you need basically a tool that can connect with that solution in case you're going for another GRC solution, as also aligned with specific standards and frameworks. So that would be all from my side, and has been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. I mean, a lot to unpackage there in terms of the presentation. And I've been watching. There's a few questions have been filtering in from the attendees. Just building on your final point there, I think one of the questions here around Have you seen, or do you have any examples of where organizations have successfully gotten out of the weeds to focus on these strategic priorities? And you mentioned they're having a sort of Jira ticketing system and then other risk management processes. How do organizations navigate that
Well,
effectively?
I would say, okay, it is, and like when I, for example, let's say built, for example, a whole vendor risk management program, okay, for a really strategic customer. First of all, I would say if you're imposing a change, okay, it's first of all important to start small, not big, and like maybe this company operates in multiple countries and entities. So it's actually key to maybe bring success, let's say, in the less advanced entity that you have, okay, to see how that works, and then once that has been successful, bring that to different um, entities of the group, okay, as of course, key here to have the right stakeholders in place, understand the limitations. Also, when specifically in implementation stages, everyone thinks I want to do A, B, C, D, E, F, many things in the checklist. It's important to prioritize and divide things in phases, because something might be irrelevant during while you're starting the project. And of course, you always face challenges during that whole deployment.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Another question that's come in here, a bit more of a holistic question, really. But the question here says, from your perspective, what is the relevance of resilience against cyber attacks and incidents, and how has this changed in the light of the Ukraine crisis? And then there's a second half to the question, but I'll start with that, and then we can follow on with the second piece.
Well, I think what has changed, okay, is everyone, like we've got internet, and everyone is more connected into the activity, which that can be an issue, okay. And also I would say the cyber terrorist attacks are more skilled, so what happens also is in this sense, like 1 year ago, it was not a variable to think about, does this vendor do business in Russia, And that has completely changed in 7 months. So what is actually proving is you need to have, like from due diligence tools or maybe those risk rating providers, like let's say Dun& Bradstreet, Dun& Jones, which provide, a much more side of things or profile of where does this vendor operate, and like if conditions of anything in that sense. And it is key to be able to monitor of those things, because you never know what is the next thing that is going to be seen as wrong, and that can change the processes, because I remember, for example, financial institutions were working with Russia, and then suddenly in 1 week's time they said, we need to stop all of that activity, so you need to identify quickly where are your third, fourth, or fifth parties doing work, and also internally, with maybe scanning tools, so you need to be able to react, because it's going to take time, but that what it actually means is you need to have everything um, kind of on track and clean, okay, because if you take 1 or 2 months to react to that element that is badly seen, then you can lose operations and can be uh, affected
Yeah,
badly.
absolutely. You alluded to something there around scanning. But the second half to that question, I think, touches on that as well. And it says, how would you describe the responsibility of IT to ensure or increase resilience? And if anything, what should be done in the short term?
So I think each stakeholder is key here, okay, but IT know really well how to embed and to build that protection, okay, in that sense. So kind of like, for example, when we are building, like different roles, that imagine an organization is purchasing a software, the IT team should actually be definitely involved to understand the implications, as also how can you segregate, what can people see and cannot. But regarding scanning and vulnerability tools, something funny that I've seen is many people, well, many organizations love them, but sometimes they don't use them in the right way, because it is important to get a lot of input and to then decide what you need to do. But of course, you need to bring that to your risk methodology, because what is the point of having all of those solutions that bring a lot of score and like also raise you threats and vulnerabilities if you then don't action or don't know what to do with that piece of information?
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I mentioned to you before the webinar started that we were speaking to a member about that exact topic and what you've been talking about today, and essentially sort of measuring the overall security posture of an organization. You've mentioned in this call, and what I've taken away is a lot of data can be fed in. How do you navigate that to give senior management or the board one number or one score that is meaningful without overwhelming them with the data going in? Is there a right way or a framework for doing this?
So I would say I'm too young, okay, to answer in the right way, okay. But I think based on my experience, what I've seen is, first of all, it's not an easy task, okay, because it is, like when you are at university or in those presentations where we say you need to sit everyone in a room, and get their sponsorship and their support. But it's not an easy task, because that's where relationships are key, okay, to understand how can like you also gonna be a little bit political in that sense. But I think what is key is kind of like make it easy to follow, okay, understand the context, and don't try to do everything in one go. And if the scope is clear, align that to objectives, so that's where you would actually get that sponsorship. Because if you go to the CTO and you actually promote a different tool, first of all, they will say why, if things are working well, but you can actually say what is the effectiveness and what metrics that are relevant for that stakeholder will help him, to drive your support. So I think that is key, to understand which metrics are relevant for each different department stakeholder, which is sometimes really complex to understand, but is easy to ask.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because I'm thinking through the lens of this member we were speaking to, and they're a very decentralized organization with sort of a group and then a lot of subsidiaries. And there's a question that's come in that I think is relevant to that as well, and it's around how does the group effectively collaborate with business owners or subsidiaries? Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of governance and communication?
So from what I've seen on my experience, okay, is when treating with business owners or maybe like a specific line of defense that maybe they just want to interact and provide feedback or propose a new vendor as an example, or report a risk. That's what is key, to have those user-friendly solutions where like even in SharePoint, like have a kind of like block or something where they can basically raise by their own means a proposal, okay, and fill in a specific form. So, for example, in my organization, we've got a self-service portal where you can actually report an incident, report a risk, propose a new vendor, okay, and actually that is going to bring different implications and can also populate an inherent risk score, okay. But actually, at the end, is something user-friendly and interactive, so people use it, because what is the point of having so many tools if those are not user friendly and easy to use, okay. So I think that is key, even also with policies, okay. I would say it's key to have like kind of like employee portal or a portal where you can actually have access to read policies really easily, and provide feedback.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that, yeah, a lot of food for thought, I think, from this webinar for the attendees. But look, I can't see any more questions coming in from the audience, so I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. But Jorge, thank you so much for your time and for presenting during this Cyber Awareness Month and yeah, contributing towards the ISF content here. But I think that pretty much concludes the session for today. Anyone on the line, if you joined late or missed anything from the webinar, it will be made available on demand via the Cyber Awareness Hub, which you can access down below. You'll also be able to download your free cyber awareness resource kit, and there's some great content in there, especially because it's October and a lot of organizations are focusing on that awareness training and education piece. But we do go above and beyond that with some of our content in the human-centered security space on behavior and culture. We do have an exciting upcoming program for the rest of this week, and I encourage you to register and share across your network as well. Attending live does mean you can engage with our speakers like Jorge live and have any key questions answered, but on demand is still an extremely effective resource to use within your organization. So please do share amongst your network if you found this interesting. Finally, if you have enjoyed today's session, please feel free to leave a rating down below. And I look forward to seeing many of you this afternoon, where some of our principal and senior ISF analysts, Paul Watts and Mark Ward, will be discussing the future role of the CISO and securing the digital organization of tomorrow. So Jorge, thank you for your time, and thank you to the audience for listening.
A pleasure. Thank you.